One of the most common questions and concern that we get when we face a new client is they always ask, do I have enough to retire? Now, from what we see, clients usually either oversimplify their numbers and the projections, or they overcomplicate things and then they make themselves much more anxious than they need to be. So for this week, I wanted to make a quick video talking about top 5 retirement mistakes that I see when I'm facing a new client, and hopefully this can also help you with your own retirement plan if you're doing it for yourself. Now, instead of just talking about top 5 mistakes, I want to lead in with an interesting article I've read online. It's written in 2019 by a couple in US saying that they have created for themselves a $250,000 passive income from their investments, yet after 7 years of retirement, they realized they couldn't retire and were forced to come back out to work. I thought this was pretty interesting because after reading through it, I realized while their numbers look impressive, they made some of the top 5 mistakes that I was going to name. So today, let's go through this case together and then let's talk about the top 5 mistakes that you should be watching out for in your retirement. Now, before we start, if you haven't already, make sure you help me like this video because this is how you can directly support this channel. Alright, now without further ado, let's get started. So let's go through this article. So this couple was basically a very high income and high net worth couple. They live in San Francisco and they built up a passive investment portfolio that was giving them $250,000 between him and his wife. Now this is obviously very impressive. So by 2012, at only the age 34, they have decided to retire. And they said in the article that life was very good for the first 7 years, but by 2019, they realized they could not retire comfortably anymore. So in the article, they outlined the 4 surprising factors that led to their decision to come back out and start working just after 7 years of retirement. The first one is house costs. Now, in 2019, in San Fran, in order to own a median detached home, which will cost 1.9 million USD at that time, you need on average a 300,000 household income. Looking at their passive income, even though it's very impressive to have this portfolio, they're actually 60K short if they want to buy and live in a $2 million home in San Fran. In there, they do mention that they have the option to go mortgage free if they sell their liquid investment, but doing so, it's going to overexpose them into just their detached home, so heavily skewed towards real estate, and they feel very uncomfortable to do so. So that wasn't really an option for them. Now, on top of that, the second factor is they have an unplanned pregnancy during their retirement, which for all the parents out there, I'm sure you all know how expensive a child can be. But on top of the increasing housing costs and an unplanned child, the third, and also I think is the most important factor, is the decreasing in interest rate. So in the article, they've said that they expect the US interest rate to be hovering around 2.5%. Now, they weren't naive and they understand that a high interest rate is probably very unlikely moving forward, but 2.5% should be a low enough bar for them to plan around this interest rate. However, by 2019, it actually fell to 1.5%. And if they were to rewrite this article 1 year later during COVID time, it would pretty much be around 0%. So this obviously creates a huge problem for them because looking at the article, it sounds like their investment portfolio is heavily into fixed income products. So if they invest $2 million at 2.5%, this would give them a 50K a year passive income. However, at 1.5% by 2019, it dropped to 30K a year. They said that they could bump their investment income back up to 50K, but they would need to put about 3.3 mil into their portfolio at 1.5% just to keep the same passive income as before. Which for them, because they weren't working, there wouldn't be any extra money for them to put in. The only solution they really have is potentially remortgage the house, refinance, and invest at that rate. But at that interest rate, it's very close to their mortgage rate. So if you factor in the costs, it wouldn't really help them that much. Now, lastly, the fourth factor is increasing healthcare costs in US. Now, I know while this doesn't really apply to Canadians because our healthcare is free, healthcare is actually still one of my top 5 mistakes that people forget to look at when they think about their retirement plan. So looking at this couple, while at the start they did create a very substantial and impressive passive income portfolio, they actually made some of the 5 mistakes that I'm about to show you. So next, let's go through my top 5 most common retirement mistakes. Alright, so mistake number 1 is people focus way too much on real estates. Now on this part, there's usually 2 types of over focus I'm seeing from new clients. Number 1, they're focusing way too much on their principal residence. I've ran into a lot of cases where their houses grew to 2-3 mil, but they only have 100 to 200,000 of liquid investment in their accounts and no pensions for them to draw from other than CPP and OAS. Now, most people, what they will do is look to downsize and sell and liquidate from their detached home at retirement so they can get some of that funding out. Now, if we look at the past 2 years, housing market has been very hot, so selling it within a couple of months wouldn't be a hard thing to do. However, from my experience with some of the clients that was going through this problem in 2018, their single detached house, while it is technically worth 2 mil or 3 mil, they had a very difficult time of selling it to fund their retirement. So if they couldn't sell it at that price and they don't want to take a lower price, or maybe the market is just not moving at all, then the only choice they have left is either do a HELOC if they could still qualify at that time, or do something called reverse mortgage. But for most people, both of these options are not ideal because it does put pressure on the retirement plan because you are incurring more and more debt as you go. Now, on the other hand, there's also another type of over-indexing, and that's people focusing too much on their rental properties. While this is not a bad idea, a lot of them actually forget the fact that housing costs do increase quite quickly over the years. So in my previous videos, I've talked about the 3 insane costs that is increasing a lot in BC and Ontario specifically: property tax, strata fee, and also your home insurance. So as time goes, a lot of clients realize that even though rent is pretty high at that time already, it doesn't keep up with the increasing house costs, and most often than not, their rental properties actually turn from positive or break even to negative cash flow. So in a way, it's actually hurting their retirement as long as they're not selling it. And on top of the slowly constant increasing house costs, you also may run to special levy if you majority are investing in condos. When your property is on a strata and the infrastructure like fencing or piping or elevators get too old, you may run into something called special levy, where the whole strata, every unit, is required to chip in together to do these big maintenance or fixes. Now, if this special levy happens to you when you're closer to retirement, this can really put a dent to your portfolio. Now, I'm not saying real estate is not good. It's actually a great addition to your portfolio, but you should not plan your retirement on just one asset class alone and then assume that all the numbers, all the figures is going to work as intended for your next 25 to 30 years. So moving on to the second most common mistake is people forgetting about inflations. So sometimes I hear new clients telling me that, hey, I have $1 million in my portfolio and I spend about $50K a year, that's my expense. Looking at my portfolio, even if I don't make any money from now on, I would be able to last for the next 20 years. This is actually not true, because while you may be spending $50K today, your $50K is actually losing purchasing power every year as we go because of something called inflation, which I have made a very detailed video on last week talking about this problem. What is inflation? And also, how come the government don't have it right for the last 30 years? So if you want to find out more, make sure you watch that video. But for example's sake, let's say inflation is 2% right now. So if you were to draw $50K today, next year, you actually need to draw $50K plus 2%. So looking at this chart, this is actually how much you have to draw out if inflation is estimated at 2% a year. Now, if inflation is bumped up at 3% a year, which my last video actually talked about is more like 3%, or maybe even 4%, let's say inflation is higher than expected from now on, this is how much you need to draw per year. And if your 1 mil doesn't grow in value at all, I've highlighted at which year your 1 mil is going to run out of money. Looking at the couple in the article that we just went through, it does seem like they didn't keep inflation in mind, because they said they had a $250K of passive income portfolio 7 years ago, but 7 years later, they're still producing $250K. So their $250K is actually losing purchasing power every year by not growing and keeping up with the inflation. Now, before we continue, if you haven't already, make sure you request to join our private Facebook group in the description below. We have almost 4,000 members, and you can go in there and ask questions and get extra contents. Alright, so speaking of calculations, this also brings me to the third most common mistake, is people sticking too much to a golden rule. So there's always a lot of articles, a lot of communities built online talking about retirement and different formulas to calculate. A lot of people, from what I see, actually stick too much to one simple rule and they just work around that rule. One of the most common rule I hear people bring up all the time is the 4% rule. Basically means that no matter how big your portfolio is, if you only draw 4% per year from that portfolio and that's enough to fund your retirement, technically your money will never run out. So for example, let's say you need 50k a year for your retirement, your pension CPP OAS is going to give you 10k a year, you need 40k more. According to the 4% rule, if you take 40k divided by 4%, this will give you exactly $1 million. And they're saying basically that if you keep $1 million invested and you only draw 40k 4% out every year, you will never run out of money because your portfolio will grow over time and it's going to keep up with that 4%. Now, Morningstar actually published an article arguing that the 4% rule actually doesn't work anymore. And in there, the major two argument is that number one, the interest rate is a lot lower than before, and number two, the bond investment return, which most retirees heavily invest in when they're retiring, is a lot slower at the first couple years, which will slow down your portfolio growth, making the 4% no longer valid. So retirement planning actually involves a lot more variables, and if the world is constantly changing, these variables is always changing all the time. Sticking to one rule that has been established many years ago may no longer apply to you, and you don't want to find out that it doesn't apply when you're actually running out of money. Now, the fourth common mistake is not accounting for additional cost in the future. Sometimes I meet new clients where they use only their daily spending to project their retirement while ignoring potential obligations or goals that they might want to achieve later down their life. For example, the most common items that people will bring up later on in life is maybe helping their children with their down payment, preparing gifts for their grandchildren like funding their education account when they're born, doing a big renovation, or sometimes maybe even having a fund for their pet when they get sick. Actually, this is a big common one and it can get very, very expensive. Ask any dog owners who have ever taken their dogs to do surgery. It can cost thousands, if not tens of thousands. Now, other than all these, you should also consider potential senior home costs in the future. Even if you foresee your children able to physically take care of you later down the road, you should still factor in extra senior care cost in your retirement plan because things can change. So looking at the stats online, either a senior home cost or a private in-house nurse, part-time or full-time, is going to easily cost you $1,500 to $3,500 per month on average, easily. Also, nowadays it's very common to get some sort of critical illness. If I remember last time, the stats is 1 in 2 male or 1 in 2.2 female will have some sort of heart attack, stroke, or cancer in their life. Now, sometimes for these sicknesses, you may not want to wait for MSP, which give you free healthcare in Canada, because it takes too long. You might want to pay some money, fly to US or other countries for private healthcare and get that done right away. And this is something I believe very deeply because of personal experience. Back then when my family was suspecting my grandpa could have some lung problem, it was going to take him about 2 months of waiting time just to get a scan done in Hong Kong through free healthcare. But instead, I believe the family paid about 2,000 Canadian and they were able to get the result back within 24 hours through private care. Now, in the end, my grandpa actually did diagnose with stage 4 lung cancer and he passed away a couple months after. But imagine if he was waiting for free healthcare. So this is why if you're thinking about your future planning, if you're young, I highly recommend you think about critical illness or even disability insurance. Get them while you're young. And if you're older and those insurance costs no longer make sense, leave maybe a lump sum in the future in your planning just for those purposes. Now, speaking of sickness, lastly, we need to talk about the fifth mistake. And this is not having a power of attorney and also an estate plan in place. So I've actually spoke about this before in my previous video when I was talking about estate planning. Power of attorney is something that's heavily neglected, but it's very important, especially if you're approaching your retirement. So generally, there are 3 major types of power of attorney. The first type of POA is for convenience more. It's for when you're alive and well. This is simply for things like if you can't be in the country and you need to get some banking done, so they can help you process whatever you want to do. However, this type of POA will automatically be terminated should you become incapacitated. So if you're looking for a POA that works while you're incapacitated, this type of POA doesn't fulfill the purpose. You will need the second type, which is POA for financial decisions when you're incapacitated. So this is the one where if you can no longer make decisions for yourself because of injury or sickness, the person that you appointed as POA will be able to take over the accounts and help you pay your bills. So this is the type of POA that I mean, and you should pick someone that's money savvy. Now, second type of POA is actually POA for healthcare, and this is for someone to make all the healthcare decision for you should you become unable to make those choices. For this type of POA, you should pick someone that truly cares and loves you, and you know they will always make the best choice for you. Without these type of POA, yes, someone can still assist you, but it's going to be very difficult and they have to go through court processing, which can be delayed several months. Now, as a bonus, I highly recommend your POA be notarized, send a copy to your banking institution, and also let the POA that you appointed know about this. This can really remove a lot of hassle if something happens to you. And finally, about estate plan. Now, even if you think you just have enough to fund your retirement, you really don't have any money left if you pass away, you should still have an estate plan. Because you could pass away earlier than expected, and then all that lump sum you saved for your own retirement now needs to pass on to someone else. At minimum, you should revisit your beneficiary, make sure they're up to date and it's going to the person that you want. Also, if you have a spouse and you have TFSA investments, you should name each other as a successor annuitant and not beneficiary. This makes a huge difference when it comes to your TFSA room and also the tax exempt status should one of you pass away. And finally, you should name an executor that you feel comfortable about so then that person can take over selling your estate as soon as possible. Now, you need to especially think about this if you have a spouse, because it's not just your retirement plan, it's two people's retirement plan. So you don't want the other person to be affected when one of you passes away. Now, to wrap up, I'll also give you a bonus mistake that I also see a lot, and it's not reviewing your plan regularly. Sometimes I get clients and they tell me that they have advisors or firms that they've been working with, but they're still sticking to the same plan that they laid out 10, 15 years ago and they have never updated. Or sometimes they tell me that their advisors or planner, whoever, talks to them only once a year or less. I think from our experience for the last 5 years, things can change extremely quickly from real estate to economy to stock market. Just like the couple in the article, they expected their interest rate to be 2.5% and they planned around that. But within 7 years, it has dropped to 1.5 or even lower today, it's close to zero if you look at US. And the plan is completely ruined because of the falling interest rate. So for us, we like to do one review every 3 to 6 months just to make sure things are going as intended and there's nothing upcoming that we need to be aware of. And also we provide a market update every 1 to 1.5 months, plus our weekly YouTube videos here. And also if something big happens suddenly like market crash, then we will also do spontaneous outreach to make sure our client understand what is going on and if we need to do any adjustments to our portfolio. This is all just to make sure our clients can stay as informed as possible. So today is just a quick video on some basic concepts of retirement. Later in the future, I might make more in-depth talking about specific areas that you need to look at and how you can plan around it. So let me know about your retirement plan and also some questions you might have by commenting below. Now, if you like these kind of videos, I do upload them 8:30 EST every Tuesday. So make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Click the bell button so you get all the notifications in the future. Alright, this is Jacky. I hope you found this interesting. I'll see you next week. Bye!